The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. Money is a globally accepted standard of value that is accepted in exchange for goods and services. Before the system of money was invented, people used the bartering system, but that is an impossible system to implement on a global scale. Paper currency backed by gold became the first globally accepted system. People had confidence in gold because precious metals retain their value, and this allowed the economy to prosper and grow. However, in the early 20th century, the gold standard was dropped, and governments began printing paper money that was not backed by anything of real substantial value. This led to an era of economic boom and bust. In today's digital age, Ammous suggests that we return to the system of backing currency with something of value, but it shouldn't be gold. These days, Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency that is a stable way of storing value, can serve as the new financial standard and help bring about a new century of economic prosperity. Direct versus indirect exchange. Before money, the economic system was based on bartering or direct exchange. Person A had one good or service that they exchanged in return for a good or service person B had. However, this system does not work if there is nothing person A has that person B wants, or vice versa. Money solves this problem. Everyone wants money because it can be exchanged for any good or service. This is a system called an indirect exchange. Money used in ancient times was nothing like the paper money used today. In the beginning, it could be anything that the whole population acknowledged had value and could be exchanged. For example, on Yap Island in the Federated States of Micronesia in the 19th century, the population used stones called rise stones to trade with each other in exchange for goods and services. All transactions were performed publicly, so the whole community could acknowledge the trade had taken place. Rise stones varied in size from small pieces all the way up to 4-ton stones. The large stones would be dragged to the center of town, where everyone could see the exchange. The stones worked well as a currency because everyone on the island knew they could sell them to anyone else on the island, and because they were divisible, so their value could vary. Smaller stones or pieces could be sold for smaller, less valuable goods, while larger stones could be exchanged for more valuable items. However, the value of the rise stones decreased over time until they stopped working as a currency. At first, they had value because the act of quarrying and moving them was so difficult that it limited the stone's supply, which made owning one valuable. However, an Irish-American captain named David O'Keefe arrived on Yap Island in the late 19th century and brought with him modern technology that made moving the stones much easier. However, once the stones became commonplace, they no longer retained any value as currency. The gold standard. The precursor to modern money was small saleable coins. These were used in pre-Christian civilizations following the invention of metallurgy, which enabled people to smelt metals down into coins that were small enough to be carried around and traded. Soon, gold became the standard for using to make metal coins. As long as 2,500 years ago, gold coins were commissioned by King Croesus in ancient Greece. This is because gold is almost indestructible and almost impossible to counterfeit. It can also only be found underground. The more it is mined, the deeper miners have to dig to find more gold, which means its supply will stay slow and predictable. Gold is a metal that is saleable and won't lose its value, which makes it a perfect standard for currency. The age of sound money began in the 18th century, when money and gold were closely linked. New developments in transportation and communications, like the invention of trains and the telegraph, meant that more people and more goods were traveling farther distances. This gave rise to a demand for convenient, easily movable methods of payment, such as paper checks and receipts. However, on their own, these paper bills were worth nothing, so governments across the world came up with the idea to issue paper money that was backed by valuable metals, which were stored in vaults. In 1717, Britain was the first nation to introduce the gold standard, which meant that gold was the metal used to back paper currency. By 1900, gold reserves served as the standard for around 50 other countries. As a result, gold became more valuable. The First World War led to the government-backed standard. Gold has been used as a standard of currency since the Roman Empire, when Julius Caesar implemented the aureus, which was a small coin that contained around 8 grams of gold, as the standard currency in the 1st century CE. However, soon the government realized they could increase their spending power by removing a small portion of gold from the coins they issued, in a process called coin clipping. This process caused inflation that led to the economic crisis that eventually destroyed the entire Roman Empire. In early 20th century Europe, something similar happened. By this time, European countries had adopted the gold standard, which meant they issued paper money and stored the corresponding gold in a small number of centralized bank vaults. However, because the governments controlled the amount of gold stored in the vaults, there was nothing stopping them from simply increasing the supply of paper money without adding a corresponding increase to the supply of gold in their vaults. This meant the government had complete control over the paper money supply. When World War I began, the European powers decided to print more money to cover the cost of the war rather than raise taxes. This money was not backed by anything, and soon they abandoned the gold standard entirely. While this enabled European countries to continue fighting the war, this also caused the value of their currencies to drop considerably. For example, the value of the Austro-Hungarian krone fell by 68.9%. At the end of World War I, European countries had to revalue their currencies. They couldn't simply return to the gold standard because their current paper currencies were worth so little compared to gold. The old exchange rate would greatly overvalue the paper currency, which would have caused a mass rush on citizens demanding gold in exchange for their paper currencies. Instead, Europe decided to adopt the standard of fiat money, which meant the paper currencies were inconvertible and backed by government decree instead of valuable gold. Under this system, governments continued to intervene in the economy to attempt to keep their currency values stable. Following the end of World War II, world leaders convened at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to establish a new post-war economic order. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the International Monetary Fund. According to this agreement, all the world's currencies would be tied to the U.S. dollar at a fixed exchange rate that would be overseen by the IMF. The U.S. dollar would then be tied to gold, which would also be held at a fixed exchange rate overseen by the IMF, and gold reserves of all participating countries would be transferred and held in the United States. Because all currencies were, in theory, backed by gold stores in the United States, the new Bretton Woods system was similar to the early 20th century gold standard. However, the United States began inflating their own currency, which led to other countries inflating theirs compared to the dollar, and eventually the gold standard was abandoned completely. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon officially ended the practice of allowing dollars to be exchanged for gold, and instead established a system by which all currencies would be determined by the relationships between global fiat currencies. Sound versus unsound money. Sound money is money that is not prone to large fluctuations in value over time. The prosperity of the 19th century was caused largely because this was an era of sound money when paper currency was backed by gold, whose value remained stable. When the value of money is stable over the long term, people feel confident saving or investing their money. While people are inherently inclined to prefer instant gratification, a stable system like sound money provides an opportunity for long-term growth, which encourages people to think of the future and make plans to increase their earnings in the long term. Investing is the act of delaying short-term gratification in exchange for increased earnings in the future. Investment also means capital accumulation will occur, because people will invest their money into producing capital goods and creating new revenue streams. This increases the likelihood of maintaining a healthy, stable economy in the long term. On the other hand, unsound money means the government will have to interfere with the money supply, which impacts prices. Investors rely on prices to make decisions because prices reflect market movements without them having to learn everything about the global events that are causing the pricing shifts. However, when the government manipulates prices, they no longer accurately reflect the market, leaving investors without a reliable way to get the information they need to make sound investments, which in turn distorts capital accumulation. Unsound money also creates economic problems, most notably recessions and excessive debt. Central planning is the government's interference in the markets, but the government, nor any other entity, does not have all the information necessary to understand the many forces that go into shaping the economy. This means the government can make bad decisions regarding the money supply, which distorts the markets and leads to cycles of economic boom and bust. When governments artificially inflate money, investors purchase more capital than they should, which leads to economic bubbles. These bubbles eventually collapse, which sends the economy into a recession. Unsound money also leads to debt. According to Keynesian economics, named after economic policies developed by the British economist John Maynard Keynes, recessions are caused when there is not enough money circulating in the economy. Therefore, increasing spending should stimulate the economy and ease the recession. There are two ways to increase spending. Governments can lower taxes, which gives people extra money to spend themselves, or the government can increase the money supply. Because most people do not actually spend their extra money in the middle of a recession, the government usually opts to increase the money supply. However, people usually use this extra money on short-term investments rather than saving it wisely. People tend not to spend this money wisely, which pushes them into debt. Government intervention and Keynesian interferences in the economy cause continuous cycles of crisis. Rather than relying on this model, which comes about as a result of unsound money, new technology makes it possible to return to the sound money standard. The Bitcoin standard. Governments should return to sound monetary policies, and Bitcoin, the world's first digital currency, can help make this happen. Like gold, Bitcoin holds value because it is predictable and has a fixed supply. In fact, the number of individual Bitcoins in circulation is capped at 21 million. That number is fixed, and once it is reached, no new Bitcoins will be issued. Bitcoins are also mined like gold, which means that the rate of supply diminishes as the currency grows, keeping the currency stable. New Bitcoins are accessed when the network pool of computer miners solves algorithmic problems, receiving Bitcoins as rewards when the problems are solved. To prevent Bitcoin gold rushes, the problems become more difficult as computers work on them, and the number of Bitcoin issues decreases by half every 4 years. This ensures the supply of Bitcoins in circulation remains steady and reliable. The designer of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, ensured the number of Bitcoins being issued will continue to decrease until 2140, when new Bitcoins will cease to be issued entirely. This means Bitcoin has an absolute scarcity, unlike almost every other commodity. While commodities like oil and gas are scarce, resources are continually invested to determine new sources of these commodities. In contrast, there are no other sources of Bitcoin, which means its supply can never be manipulated and its value will always remain stable. Bitcoin security. For sound money to be effective, it also has to be secure. Bitcoin is secured by a new technology called the public blockchain. A block is a record of all the recent mining activity and transactions that the mining computers in the network pool have performed when they solve an algorithmic puzzle. Each new block is attached to all other older blocks via a chain, and all these blocks make up the Bitcoin blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain forms a ledger that contains all the information about every single blockchain transaction ever performed, and the details are available to every network user. No one can validly own Bitcoins unless they have registered it on the blockchain, and a majority of network users have approved it. The Bitcoin network is managed by its own users, so there is no need for a central third-party authority. The system also deters cheating because trying to cheat by creating a fraudulent block is more difficult and requires more processing power than verifying new blocks. Furthermore, cheating would only devalue the entire Bitcoin network, leading to a drop in demand that would make the fraudulent blocks worthless. The challenges of the Bitcoin standard. However, the Bitcoin standard does not come without challenges. One of the major challenges it faces is price volatility. From the first Bitcoin transaction in May of 2010 to October of 2017, an individual Bitcoin's value jumped 422,520,000% from $0.000994 to $4,200 in 7 years. Bitcoin also has short-term volatility. Bitcoin value jumped from $750 to $20,000 just in the year 2017. These significant jumps in value are caused because Bitcoin supply is fixed. Because supply cannot rise to meet increasing demand, the price has increased in response. Demand is not a fixed variable, and this price volatility has undermined Bitcoin's ability to be a stable and effective store of value. However, demand has fluctuated wildly, largely because Bitcoin is still new and should even out in the long term. Bitcoin also faces challenges because it is so new. Bitcoin still needs to grow before it can become the new standard, but this likely means that it would need to increase its dependence on large, centralized institutions. This undermines its selling point as a standard that does not need to rely on third parties. Bitcoin's transaction limit is currently capped at 500,000 per day, but will likely increase as it grows. However, regardless of where the Bitcoin's transaction limit is capped, it will likely require an increase in the number of copies of the Bitcoin ledger, which in turn will increase the transaction fees and the amount of processing power needed to update the Bitcoin blockchain. This might mean Bitcoin will have to eventually be taken off blockchain entirely, and a centralized institution will have to be responsible for managing this new system. Bitcoin has great potential to create a new sound money policy, but will have to address these challenges to avoid encountering the same fate as the gold standard. The main takeaway. The gold standard has been the most effective sound money system throughout history. Backing money by gold enabled prosperity and allowed individuals to prioritize long-term savings and investments. However, after the world abandoned the gold standard in the 20th century as a result of 2 world wars, the global economy has been subjected to boom and bust cycles caused by unsound money and the resulting government interference in the markets. Bitcoin, a new cryptocurrency, is a stable unit of value that could serve as the new standard of currency. The Bitcoin standard faces some challenges, especially because it is still new, but it has the potential to bring a new era of sound money and economic growth.
Hi, I'm Rhonda, and this is an exclusive audiobook video recorded for the Audiobook Master Channel. Enjoy your audiobook and have fun learning. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll get updated on our next upload. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up and say your thoughts about the book we just covered. Do you want to listen to a summary or review of a book that we haven't covered in the past? Say it in the comments below or send us a message. Don't forget to check our other uploads. Enjoy listening!